Hey, everybody, this is Nathan. This is the Skill Builders Podcast. Thank you for listening this week. Really excited. We are starting we're starting to build the skill of reading biblical prose discourse, just learning how to read laws, letters, and some wisdom in the Bible. And this is really, really cool. It's going to be a great episode, but I'm coming by myself. So no Kadaja, no Matt, no Adrian this week, because I wanted to give some additional background information to this skill. There's a lot we covered during the practice session, but I really felt like we needed to spend more time going through the skill with some additional information. And so listening on the podcast will be great, but if you can listen or if you can watch on YouTube, I think that'll add just a little bit more clarity, only because some of the visuals and slides may make it come to life a little bit more. Regardless of how you're listening, I'm confident it'll be beneficial for you, and I'm confident you'll enjoy the episode. So God bless you and happy listening. Hey everybody, my name is Nathan Wiggins, and welcome to this episode of the Skill Builders Podcast, where we help you grow and maintain wholehearted devotion to Jesus by practicing the skills of a disciple. And today we're going to be working on the skill, we're going to be building the skill of reading biblical prose discourse. And we're going to talk about that today. We're starting this skill in a few next week, and I'm really excited about that. But in all of our practice sessions, we try to give you additional background information just so you have a point of reference for what skill you'll be practicing. Sometimes we're not able to cram all of that background information into the practice session. So we've got to do a preemptive additional background information session before we get into the actual practice of that skill. And so this is just going to be, you can think of it if you're a basketball fan, you can watch film, but then you go out and shoot your free throws. Next week, we'll be shooting the free throws, but this week, we're going to be watching a lot of film. And so once you get this background information, you'll be more equipped and you'll feel better and more confident about executing when we actually practice the skill. So with all that being said, we are building the skill of reading biblical prose discourse. And so we've already went through narrative and poetry, three different main genres in the Bible are narrative, prose discourse, and poetry. And poetry was a lot of fun because we got to learn how to navigate all the different metaphors and explore poetry. And I really love the plot conflicts, learning about that and the design patterns in narrative. 33% of the Bible is written in poetry. Then you've got another 44% written in 33 is written in poetry, 44 is in narrative. And so the final 24%, my math is jacked up in there somewhere, I believe. Oh, well, the last chunk, 24%, about 1 out of every 4 pages of the Bible you read is written in prose discourse. And so what that means is when it comes to building these skills, we want to read the genre in the way that the author intended for us to read it. I don't want to read a song like it's an essay, and I don't want to sing an essay like it's a song or like it's a poem. So when it comes to prose discourse, we don't want to read this like it's a story or like it's a poem, because we can miss out on some of the information that the author is trying to communicate to us by writing to us in the particular genre that they chose. Yes, we've got to know historical context. We've got to know all the different other kind of context. But if we get the literary context, if we get the literary style is written in wrong, then we'll still be missing out on information. So that's why we're going through this skill. That's part of the reason why the skill is important. But now we'll just talk about what is prose discourse. So we'll jump right into it. This is our last skill in helping us learn how to basically read the Bible in our How to Read the Bible series. We want to increase biblical literacy, and we want to help people have fun and know how to read the Bible. It's way easier to read the Bible when you actually know how to read it. And so all that being said, when I looked trying to research what prose discourse is, I got it from Bible Project. And on their website, they did not give me a satisfactory definition of prose discourse. When I scavenged the internet did not give me a satisfactory definition for prose discourse. So what I ended up having to do is I just kind of crammed something together that I think would work. So prose is one word and discourse is another word. Cramming them together, you've got a literary genre. So what is discourse? Discourse is a coherently arranged, serious, and systematic treatment of a topic in spoken or written language. If you don't get anything else, you're going to hear me repeat over and over and over again: serious and systematic treatment of a topic, because that's really important. That's what discourse is. And when I say prose discourse, you can think of there are different kinds of ways that discourse is communicated, but just think of a serious and systematic treatment of a topic. So think of when the president gets up to speak. Think of when your pastor gets up and gives a sermon, a speech or a sermon. That's prose discourse, serious, systematic treatment of a topic. You can also think about law. You have business law, you have real estate law, you have all these different kind of laws and books upon books up and pages upon pages written about this law. And so that law code is a serious and systematic treatment of something. And you even have Paul's letters, the letters that he writes to the different churches. He's writing those letters. You've got Peter's letters. He's writing those letters. You got John's letters. They're trying to address something in a serious and somewhat systematic way. They're trying to get their point across in some kind of way. So when you think of discourse, you can think of those are just some examples of what you can think of. But not only that, when it comes to prose discourse, you've got the prose part of it. And now prose is ordinary language that follows regular grammatical conventions and does not contain a formal metrical structure. And what that basically means is that it's not poetry and that it's not a song. There's no rhythm to it that you have, or cadence that you have to try to follow. Think of it as a regular conversation. Right now, me talking into this mic is prose. When you have a conversation with your husband, your wife, your kids, your mom, your dad, your friend, your family, that's prose. When you're writing a story, unless it's a poem that's written, it's a prose narrative. It's prose something. It's just in ordinary, everyday language without any type of meter or cadence to it. And so if we were to smash these two definitions together, we would have prose discourse is a coherently arranged, serious, and systematic treatment of a topic in written or spoken ordinary language that follows regular grammatical conventions. So that is what prose discourse is. But again, I must stress, remember, serious and systematic treatment of a topic. If you can remember that when you're reading the prose discourse in the Bible, okay, somebody's trying to go through this in a serious, methodical way. And so that's what prose discourse is. Now, what is the purpose of prose discourse? Well, the purpose of prose discourse is to use logic to help us understand a set of arguments or instructions. So in prose discourse, the author wants us to use the logical part of our brain to help us understand what they're trying to the message they're trying to convey. So basically, they want us to be able to connect the dot from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, yada, yada. And eventually, I got exactly what they're trying to say. So when you're going through prose, know that somebody's trying to persuade or get you to understand something. But not only that, prose discourse is written because you can easily understand it. Prose discourse is direct communication, whereas narrative, a story, is kind of indirect. Poetry is really indirect communication. Prose discourse is direct communication. It directly communicates what, why, and how something should be done. And this is really important because I don't know if you've ever imagine if you just asked somebody, can you give me directions to the store? And they just said, the store. I remember once when I went to the store. It was a dark and stormy night that day, rainy. And I got in the line and I saw some Kit Kat bars and I realized that Kit Kat bars are amazing. And as they're just going on with the story, you can just feel yourself saying, this is not answering my question at all. And they keep going on with it. And then I talked to the cashier and she was having a lovely day. And everything about her kids was spectacular. They're making the AB honor roll. And they're just going on and on and on. And you're just like, all I was trying to do was get directions to the store. But that is the power of prose discourse. It helps you to be able to directly communicate and receive direct information from a source. And so you easily explain it and somebody else can easily understand it. Now, why does this skill matter? Well, this skill matters because direct communication, for all of its benefits, it can be negative, or we can misuse it when it comes to reading the Bible, because there's actually a problem in terms of direct communication in the Bible. What do I mean by that? Well, in the Bible, when you're reading Prose Discourse, you're going to see a lot of yous and I's, and it's going to really feel like you're in a conversation, and it feels like they're talking to you, you're talking to them. I did this, you need to do that. And while that has its benefits, if it was me and you talking, or you and your wife talking, if you're 2000 years removed from the conversation, that can produce some problems. Imagine if your great 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 grandfather wrote your great 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 grandmother a letter. Now, although it's lovely that they wrote each other a letter, they don't have you in mind when they're writing this letter. I mean, they may have you in mind like their generations, but they don't have you specifically in mind. They have one another in mind. And try as hard as you might to put yourself into their mind in that letter at that time, it's just not going to happen. That's not how it works. That's not how it operates. When Paul wrote his letter, when Peter wrote his letter, they had the church that they were writing to in mind. But when you see all the yous and the I's, you can feel like they're talking directly to you. So we've got to navigate, when are they talking directly to? Okay, they're always talking directly to their audience. But when does when do I apply what they want their audience to do to me? That's how I'll say that. And so that's one of the problems. And the other problem is the problem of cultural relativity. This skill matters because cultural relativity is a big issue, and it's hinged to the direct communication problem. And I read the book, How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth, and they sum this up way better than I ever could. So I'm just going to read the quote for us. The problem of cultural relativity. In the book, they say the big issue among Christians, and I'll make sure I link, or I'll put in the resources this book, the title of this book. But here we go. The big issue among Christians committed to Scripture as God's word has to do with the problem of cultural relativity. What is cultural and therefore belongs to the first century alone, and what transcends culture and is thus a word for all seasons? I'll ask that question again. What is cultural and therefore belongs to the first century alone, and what transcends culture and is thus a word for all seasons? Cultural relativity is a challenge. What was Paul communicating that only stays in the first century? And what was Paul communicating that needs to transcend every century? What was Moses writing when Moses wrote the laws? What did he write that was just for the children of Israel? And what did he write that was for me and you today? I know, I'm sorry for my listening audience, but on the screen right now, and I'm pretty sure these are Zambian either founding documents or legal documents from the country of Zambia. Now, I'm in America right now. I do not live in Zambia. But let's just pretend that on these documents right now, you have things like do not kill and do not steal and different things like that. Now, even though I am in the United States of America right now, I could get the information from this document telling me not to steal and not to kill. And I can look at that and say, oh, yeah, that can apply to me. But there's also things in this document that are specific to that country. The problem of cultural relativity is illuminated when we see things in a particular document that align to our values, and then other things that are not quite as aligned. So we've got to sift through, and we got to try to filter through, okay, what is aligned, because we shouldn't murder. There's no one should be murdering anywhere. That applies to me just like it would to somebody who lives in Zambia right now. But if I were to sift through and filter through this founding document or this legal document from Zambia, would everything apply to me in this document, even though I'm in America right now? Of course not. It just wouldn't. Everything in there is written to the people of Zambia. It's not written to the people of the United States. So just trying to figure out what belongs and what stays. What stays in the first century and what belongs in every century. So all that being said, that is why this skill matters. That's why we use it, and that just gives you a little bit of background of prose discourse. But now that we've went through prose discourse, we're going to go through the system and the mechanics of the skill. What do I mean by system and mechanics? Well, the system is basically the components of the skill, and the mechanics are how each one of those components work inside of the skill. So the system would be like the the skill would be the car, and the system or the different components would be the wheel and the tires and the trunk, the different parts of the car. And the mechanics would be how the tires turn, how the wheel spins, how the trunk opens. It's the how of the different components. So, with that being said, we were looking at the system of how we build the skill of reading biblical poetry. How do we build the skill of reading biblical poetry? Well, this is the system. It's simplified, but it's recognize, understand, shape, and sift. So the system of reading biblical poetry, the system of building the skill, of reading biblical poetry is recognize, understand, shape, and shift. Now, if you would just kind of take the first letter of all of those, you get RUSS. You get Russ. And so when you're trying to build the skill of reading biblical prose discourse, and I may say poetry every now and then. If I say poetry every now and then, y'all forgive me. I'm trying to say prose discourse. Building the skill of reading biblical prose discourse, just remember the word Russ. Think of your favorite Russ. Think of your favorite Russell. Whenever you're about to read a letter from Peter, or you're about to read Leviticus or something in Deuteronomy, think of just your favorite Russ. So it may be Russell Brand, it may be Russell Crowe, or it could be my favorite Russ, Russell Wilson. But when you're trying to build the skill of reading biblical poetry, just think of your favorite Russ. And so that's the skill simplified, RUSS. But if we were to fill that out a little bit, the recognize means recognize prose and the type of prose that you're reading. So it may be law, letter, or wisdom, the different kinds. And so it just helps out a little bit knowing that you're reading prose and knowing what kind it is. Next, you want to understand the points of persuasion or instruction. So you want to understand the points of persuasion and instruction. Number 3 would be shaped. How would this information have shaped the audience's relationship with God? And so recognize, understand, shaped or shape. And then number 4, sift. Sift through what's described to find what's prescribed. So recognize that you're reading prose discourse, understand the points of persuasion. How would this information have shaped the audience relationship with God? And then sift through what was described to find what's prescribed or prescribed. And so that's the system of reading prose discourse, the skill of reading prose discourse. And so now that we understand the system, let's go to the mechanics. Basically, how does each one of these components work? How do we recognize prose discourse and the type of prose? How do we recognize the letters, the law, and the wisdom, each one of these? Well, one of the ways you can do that is just knowing that you're in a certain book. When you're in certain books, you're going to be reading prose discourse more than not. And so when you're in certain books, they're called law books. And so Deuteronomy, Leviticus, these are law books. And these are books which are basically instruction manuals for allowing unholy Israel to live in fellowship with holy Yahweh. So you're in an instruction manual. And so that is kind of, whenever you're reading the laws, that kind of gives you a clue. And so whenever you're reading these books of law like Deuteronomy or Leviticus, that should give you a clue that you're reading prose discourse. Next, we have the wisdom literature, or the wisdom books that also have prose discourse, or also prose discourse. Now, the wisdom books are basically trying to answer this question: how to be good at life. How can you be good at life? And wisdom literature in the form of prose discourse is trying to persuade you on how to live a good life. So here, think of Ecclesiastes and James. Now, Ecclesiastes is also known as a book of poetry, but there is a ton of prose discourse in Ecclesiastes as well. And what most people are familiar with when it comes to prose discourse would be the letters. Now, in the letters, the author wants to persuade you to believe and live a certain way. And let me even rephrase it. I wrote it you on the document or on the slide, but it really should be the author wants to persuade their audience to believe and live a certain way. So Paul wants the church in Ephesus to believe and live a certain way, the church in Rome to believe and live a certain way. And again, we're looking at certain books. Basically, the moment you leave Acts, from Romans to Revelation, you're in prose discourse, because all of those are letters written to different churches. And so whenever you get past Acts, your ears should perk up. I'm in prose discourse. I should read this literature as if it's prose discourse. as if it's a serious and systematic treatment of a topic. When you get to the laws, remember, prose discourse, wisdom literature, James, Ecclesiastes, how to live a good life. I'm in prose discourse. And you just want to recognize, again, how do we recognize where we're in biblical prose discourse? This is one way to do it. Another way would be to notice conversational language. The moment you start seeing a lot of yous and a lot of I's, you automatically know that, I'm in prose discourse. There is a systematic, serious treatment of a topic going on. There's a conversation happening between two parties. And while I'm on the topic of conversation, we have to be mindful when we're reading prose discourse. You see the yous and the I's, and it's like, okay, they're talking to one another. They're talking to one another. Paul is talking to me. Peter is talking to me, you and I. But that's not really what's going on at that point in time. He's not really talking to one individual. When Paul says you, what he's really thinking about and what's really more accurate would be like Paul sitting up top and people listening to him, kind of like a sermon, kind of like him. He's addressing a crowd. So when he says you, he's really talking to the crowd, like you all. Now, he is talking individually to you, kind of, but more specifically, he's talking to the crowd. So when you see the yous and the I's in prose discourse, yes, he is talking to you, and he's talking to you, and he's talking to you, but he's really talking to you, which means everyone. Hopefully that makes sense. And so he does have the individual in mind, but he has the collective in mind as well, which really makes the word you very powerful and y'all very powerful. But that's one of the things we have to be mindful for in prose discourse. But do notice the conversational language. And it may not be you and I. Sometimes it'll be me and they. You'll see a lot of that as well. And so still, how do we recognize prose discourse, biblical prose discourse in the Bible? Look for logical connector words, logical connector phrases. And so you're going to see things like therefore, in conclusion, because of this, for this reason, thus, consequently, so on and so forth. People, the author writing is trying to connect big ideas. And they use these phrases to help us know when they're trying to connect big ideas. If you see a list of instructions, do this, don't do that. Serious and systematic treatment of a topic. They're trying to get us, and they want us to really hone in on something they want us to do or they don't want us to do. And so being direct in their communication, do this, don't do that, is a form of prose discourse. Basically, when it starts to sound like a cookbook or it starts to sound like a recipe, this is how you do this, add this, take this away, stop doing this, don't do that, you're in prose discourse. And last, we've got how do you know you're in prose discourse? There is a chart we can look at that I created that gives us a little bit of insight when we're in narrative versus when we're in prose discourse. And the reason why I did this is because sometimes it can be tricky to know when you're narrative versus prose. And so in the chart, we see a narrative of describing an event to you, like what's a good one? So in the year of King Josiah, I saw the Lord such and such and such. Or in the year of King David, this and this and this happened. They're just reciting a story to you. They're describing an event to you. But in prose, you're going to see people commanding to do something. You're going to see people trying to convince something, or they want you to see things in a certain light. They're going to be shedding light on something. They're going to be adding wisdom or giving you wisdom about a topic. Narrative is written in third person. Then David did this. Then Saul did this. Prose discourse is typical, and this is typical. These are rules of thumb. They're not absolute, but they give you a good way to notice it. If you see a lot of first and second person, you and I, that's usually a prose discourse. You're looking for plot conflicts and their resolution. So when you see tension, when you see somebody kill somebody, when you see this happen and that happen, and we see consequences, that's typically narrative. Where you're looking in prose discourse, you're looking for logical conclusions and connector phrases. You're looking for instruction on how to do things. And so that's a difference, a way you can discern between narrative and prose discourse. And so that's how we recognize. Now we're on to what are the mechanics of the skill, meaning how do we understand the points of persuasion or instruction? So we know how to recognize now. Now, how do we understand the points of persuasion and instruction? Number one, biggest thing, know the author and the audience. Know the author and the audience. Basically, who is talking to whom. So much gray will be clarified when we keep on our mind who is talking to who is talking to who is trying to persuade or instruct whom. Often, this is found at the beginning of the chapter. And this is really important because this helps us extract ourselves out of the story. Yes, we are a part of the story. We are a part of God's story. But Peter was just trying to talk to his church. James was just trying to talk to the churches that he was speaking to. Paul was just trying to talk to Ephesus in this particular letter. He was not talking to me directly. So when I remember who is speaking to whom, I can extract myself and I can just realize this is a conversation between two parties. And so after that, we want to review and understand points, previous points made before connector words. And so we want to look for the therefores and the in conclusions and because of this, for this reason, consequently, whatever it may be. We want to look for all of those and we want to make sure we understand those points of why is the therefore right there? Or as people used to say, when you see therefore, what is it there for? And you want to be able to make sure you understand whatever those logical conclusion words were, in conclusion, or because of this, well, because of what? For this reason. For what reason? You want to make sure you understand all of that before you move on. Now, this isn't in all prose discourse, but when you see these words, make sure you understand what was behind that word so that you can understand the point in the current section. Now, this applies to all prose discourse. You just want to make sure I understand what's going on right now. A great question to ask is, what's the point? Why is Paul writing about this? Why is Moses writing about this? Why is James writing about it? What's the point of this particular passage? And if you can answer what's the point of this particular passage, then you understand what's going on. If you can't understand what's the point, then just do a little bit more digging and do a little bit more reading. And at this point, I'll have to say, try your best not to use a commentary. Just read and try to use your, I don't want to say critical thinking skills. I want you to use your critical thinking skills, but try not to rely on somebody else's opinion before you formulate your own. And so when you're asking what's the point, do your best to figure it out before you go to somebody else. That just will help you navigate the Bible better and it'll make it more meaningful to you. But the goal is that once you know who the author and the audience is and you're understanding what's going on in the current section, what you're really well on your way to doing is to navigating all of the confusion on one side of the argument to have clarity on the other side of the argument. So that it may be, it's like sometimes when we're reading the Bible, it feels like a jumbled mess, but when we make sure that we take time to understand everything, it's going to produce a lot of clarity for us. And it'll make it easy for us to summarize the points. And then once we summarize the points, we can move on from just understanding the points of persuasion or the points of instruction that the author wanted us to understand. So we recognize biblical biblical prose discourse. We understand the point of persuasion or instruction. And the next part is shape. Remember Russ, your favorite Russ. Remember him. Or I don't know if there are any girls named Russ, but I guess you could remember Rosita. Never mind. Yeah. So how would the information have shaped the audience's relationship with God? How would what I just read and what I just understood, how would this have shaped the audience's relationship with God? And so this is important because everything written in prose discourse is meant to both directly and indirectly shape your relationship or your view of God. Now, directly because do this, don't do that. Let me give you some theology so you can understand how God is and who he is. Paul, in most of his letters, think of the first 11 chapters in Romans, are to theology. The first 3 chapters in Ephesians are theology. The first 2 chapters in Colossians, theology. Chapter 2 in Philippians, theology. He's giving us theology first. And then once we understand the theology, once we know who God is, then that informs how we live everything out. So then chapters 12 through 16 in Romans are all about practical application. Chapters in the chapter 2, 3, and 4 in Colossians are all about how we live what we know about God out and how we treat our people. So that's direct communication. But just reading it alone, there is some shaping going on. God is using the conversation between Paul and Ephesus, between Peter and the churches that he was writing to shape us, whether we realize it or recognize it or not. And that's okay. But the shaping is going on. Just like podcasts are so popular right now because they're shaping the way we think and the way we interact, even if it's not direct, it's through the conversation. Basically, when we read the Bible, it's like we're getting the podcast version of what is happening in the first century. And then we use that to inform our lives. And sometimes when all of this happens, it's it, it may feel you may not even feel it at all. Sometimes you may feel it a lot. Sometimes the shaping may be big and he's got to do a lot of reshaping and a lot of remolding. And sometimes all he has to do is he's trying to fine tune things that we already know and already understand about him. Regardless, we're all being shaped every time we read the Bible to conform to the image of Jesus Christ. And so let's just embrace it and recognize that that's happening, especially when we read Prose Discourse. And so now that we understand that we're being shaped and the author is shaping the audience's view of God directly and indirectly, last we go to sift. We went to recognize, understand, shape, sift. How do we sift through what's described to find what's prescribed? How do we sift through? Think of a sieve. Think of the sifter. Think of I don't need everything I just read. I just got a ton of information from everything that I just understood. I just got a ton of information trying to recognize and see how the author was trying to shape my view of God, how Moses was trying to shape my view of God through all giving me all these different laws and everything. There's a lot of information I just received, but I don't need all of that information. I don't need every single thing I just got. So I sift through, I empty out all the things that I don't need and keep the things that I do need. And the things that I do need are basically the things that God is prescribing to me right then and there. A prescription is an authority giving you something that you need for your life. Think of a doctor giving you some medicine. They are prescribing you something that will benefit or help you. So the same way when we read the Bible, when we're going through and we're getting all of this information, God, so much information. I don't need all of it. And so I sift through all the stuff that I don't need. And whatever is left on my shaker is the thing I do need. It is my prescription. And from that prescription, I take it. Think of every time you read the Bible, the hand of God is coming down from heaven and he is prescribing to you something that you need. So you sift through what's you sift through what's described, all that information that was described in this story to find what's prescribed. What is God trying to give directly to me? And so how do we do that? Well, we first do that by remembering the initial author and the audience in the situation. And so again, who is talking to whom saves us a ton of trouble. Moses is talking to the Israelites. James is talking to the churches who are spread out. If we just remember who is talking to whom, that helps us know how to sift through all this information. And so once we know who is talking to whom, we can continue down the line of learning and knowing how to sift through everything I just got. So how do we know when God is prescribing something to me, for me individually? Well, for most passages, it's actually fairly intuitive. What is described to the audience is often what God is prescribing to you. But there are passages where it's sticky, whether it be women in ministry, whether it be head coverings, whether it be the laws in the Old Testament, whether it be the book of Ecclesiastes. We can go on and on. There are all kinds of things that we read in the Bible, and it's like, what am I supposed to do with that? I don't even know. The spiritual gifts that are oftentimes viewed as, well, that was then and this is now. And that's typically how we look at these things. That was then and this is now. Well, how do I know the difference between what was then and what needs to be right now? And here are a couple of guidelines. Number one is to stay within the constant themes of the Bible. And so if the constant themes of the Bible are things like some of the things I wrote on my screen, but I'll just say them, like the fruit of the Spirit. Whenever something is pushing you towards love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, that's something that God is prescribing to you. When you read the Sermon on the Mount, that is something God is prescribing to you. And the elements of the Sermon on the Mount, when you read them throughout the scripture, that's probably something God is prescribing to you. Um, People are made in the image of God. And so when you see these different things, God is prescribing something about people having value to you. You want to understand and take that in. Sexual purity. God wants us, there's every place in the Bible, um, sexual purity, he has described it and prescribed it a certain way. And so this is really important because we look at something like homosexuality. And there is a movement today that says, well, that was then and this is now. Homosexuality was bad then, but this is a new century and a new era. The Bible was written over 2,000 to 3,000 years, or 1,500 years, 2,000, depending on how the events of the Bible happened over thousands of years. I'll put it that way. Now it's collected the different time frame. But over all those years, those themes through the Bible are a testament to us that if it survived all those thousands of years in the Bible, then that's probably a theme that we should be applying even to this day. So when we look at something like homosexuality throughout the Bible, it is not something that God values. That it is not something that God wants. He never approves of it. That's the word I'm looking for. And so it was never a time that homosexuality was approved of. And so you never get out. So sexual purity always has a value. A man and a woman becoming husband and wife is the staple, and that has not changed. And so if it survived all that time in God, then we can be confident that he's prescribing that same thing to us. Any kind of sex outside of the confines of marriage, that itself lets us know that because it was never approved in the Bible, then that's still prescribed for us today to not go outside of marital relations. The 10 Commandments, so on and so forth. The constant things of the Bible give us boundaries to know what God is prescribing to us today. But even if we keep going with that, you can think of things like this. Let's say you're reading the Bible for the first time. All of this is kind of new to you. Well, one thing to look at, does this help me love God more? Does this help me love people more? If it does, then that's a good chance that God is prescribing that to you. Again, this is rule of thumb. It's not always work, but it's going to work more times than not. St. Augustine, if I summarize some of his words, say that the purpose of the Bible is to help people love the true God more and to love other people more completely. And so I think that's a good summary of the statement above. Loving God, loving people. If what you're reading is helping you do that, honoring people, not murdering, not backbiting, then there's probably a prescription being downloaded from the hand of God from heaven to you through your word. And so I'll just say this, that I would encourage you to allow the constant things of the Bible, the traditions of the church, your elders, and your community to refine your prescriptions. Basically, let your community sift through even the things that you hold near and dear, the conclusions that you come to. It's okay for your community to check you on some stuff. Now, we know that our denominations can be wrong and our perspectives and things that we get could be wrong, but we just pray, Lord, rid me of all bad and false doctrine. Help my denomination get things right, Lord. Just keep praying that, and the Lord will continue, ask, seek, and knock. He will help us get on the right path as long as we stay faithful to asking and praying that prayer. And so that's some of the ways. Stay inside the constant themes of the Bible. But not only that, how do we know when God is prescribing something to us? We'll sift through all this information and I get something. You follow the principle of the passage, even if the particulars of the passage are unable to be understood or followed. Now, one of my favorite examples of this are the head covering passages, because when I read the head covering passages, I have no point of reference for it. Paul is just like, he's not scathing, but he's like, it's like so dirt obvious to him that an uncovered head or a covered head, depending on if you're a male or female, is just awful. And I've never even, the only time I ever seen people with their heads covered is when they're having a hat, like the women in church or when I wear a hat. So it's not at all clear to me, any of this stuff. But what I can do is I can look at the principle of the passage, even if the particular is completely lost to me, or it couldn't be followed in some other passage. Like, let's just say we got the laws of the Old Testament and I need to do an animal sacrifice. Well, I can't do an animal sacrifice because more than likely it's illegal. And I don't own a cow. But the principle is to make atonement, ask for forgiveness when I do something wrong. The principle would be I need to do something that does not draw attention to myself. Even though head coverings doesn't make sense to me, if I were to come to church in my underwear, that would draw attention to myself. That would be doing things that are out of line and out of order. So head coverings was out of order back then. Me wearing my underwear to church would be my boxers to church only would be out of order today. I'm drawing attention to myself, and it's not. It just wouldn't be helpful. It would be everybody would be focused on me and not on the Lord. Secondly, it only appears one time in the Bible about head coverings that I'm aware of anyway. And so that even gives you some more confidence that maybe that's cultural because it's only happening one time and we don't have to carry that from one generation to the next. But even in saying that, it's okay to feel like when you're reading something that God isn't prescribing you anything in a particular passage. How do we know when God is prescribing us something? Well, maybe he's not. Maybe he just wants you to read the passage, and that's okay as well. And so it's okay to read something and not feel like God is downloading something to you from heaven. You don't have to feel like I have to apply every single thing that I read every single time. That can produce its own challenges as well. So we don't always have to have something prescribed to us. Then lastly, I think it's lastly, I might have another point. It says, how do we know when God is prescribing something to us? Well, God speaks to us in our days, in our ways. He spoke to Moses in Moses' days, in Moses' ways. He spoke to David in David's days, in David's ways. He spoke to Paul in Paul's ways and in Paul's days. He's going to speak to us in our days and in our ways. Got that from Scott McKnight in the book Blue Parakeet. And it's really helpful. It really is freeing that God is speaking to us in our days, in our ways. And we all do this whether we know it or not. Anytime we've ever given a quarter, a dime, a nickel, a dollar to our church in obedience to God, we are living out God's command in our days, in our ways. The Bible never tells you to give a dollar. You see shekels, you see an ephah. You don't hear anything or read anything about dollars and cents, U.S. cents, being given in ancient Israel because it didn't exist. And so all of us are applying what we read in the Bible in our days, in our ways. So that should free us to know that, okay, it's impossible to bring everything from the Bible to the 21st century. So what is described and what is prescribed? We've got to figure that out. Every time we give a handshake or we give a hug instead of giving a holy kiss, that's us living out the Bible in our days, in our ways. And so that's just, to me, it's just very, very freeing. And last point in all this is that bad doctrine is bad doctrine. I'm not trying to get us to be, we're thinking of our days and our ways. I'm not trying to get us to be so progressive that we start doing things that we ought not do, like approve of something like murder or sexual immorality, like fornication or, watching pornography or something like that. I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to produce bad doctrine from all of this. The entire point of this is just to make sure we're in the boundaries. As long as we stay in the boundaries, we can't go wrong. Our challenge is figuring out what are the boundaries. But if we read with these lenses that we're prescribing today, we'll make sure that we stay in bounds. Lastly, the text can never mean what it never meant. And so if you are reading the Bible and you say, oh, I think God is prescribing this to me. Well, if it never meant that in the first century, then it doesn't mean that to you right now. If it has to mean something in the first century first, then it has to mean something to you. It has to mean something in the 1000 BC, then it has to mean something to you. And they can't have two different meanings. And so, rounding it on now, how do we sift through what's described to find what's prescribed? We have to remember that individual communication is different from corporate communication. What God prescribes to you may not be what he prescribes to your church or to a group of people. Sometimes they do overlap. Sometimes what God gives you is exactly what the church needs, but it's not always. And more times than not, What you get prescribed when you read the word is going to be different than what is prescribed from the entire church body as a whole. And again, this skill and this portion of the skill helps us to stay within the boundary lines of the story of the Bible while helping us discern God's voice for our day. So think of a basketball court. There is an insane amount of things that you can do inside of a basketball court. Run, jump, pass. There are different ways you can pass, different ways you can shoot. All that is fine and is in the boundaries. We just have to make sure that we don't go out of bounds. So just using some of the guidelines that I gave today, my goal is to help us make sure that we have a boundary that we can stay inside of. And as long as we don't go outside of that boundary, that gives us a chance to follow the right prescriptions as opposed to the wrong ones. And God is faithful and He's just. It's okay, even if we get out of bounds, because if I mess something up, the Lord can help me get right back on path. And this comes to our final tip: to be flexible. The more you learn, your opinions and understanding of a passage may change. And so even if you get out of bounds, it's okay to just always ask the Lord, Lord, sift me. Lord, get me back to you. Get me back on the court. Get me back on path. That just has to be a constant cry of our hearts. Lord, get my denomination back on path. Lord, get my community back on path. Get me back on path. Get the plank out of my own eye so that I can see the log in the speck in my brother's eye. Lord, there just has to be constant in our prayers. And a part of that is constantly adjusting your doctrine. It may not be a full sail adjustment. You may not be doing a 180, but maybe you'll do a 1 degree or 3 degree. I read that wrong. Oh, I didn't fully understand that. I may have just stepped on the line. I'm not all the way out of bounds, but I stepped on the line right here. Let me get back on the court. Just be flexible. All of us are learning and growing. The Christian that we're going to be 10 years from now is going to be different than the Christian that we are today, because we are learning and we're doing things better year after year after year. And then finally, last tip, make sure you understand the purpose of a passage before coming to hard conclusions. Read the entire book first. Read all of Romans or Ephesians, all of Leviticus. Make sure you just understand the entire book. If you don't read the entire book and you just get 1 point, 2 points, and 3 points, it's kind of like coming to a full conclusion after only having saw 3 clips of a movie. You go to movie clips on YouTube and you watch 10 of the clips, and then you just come to these full, strong conclusions. That's not right. That's only 10 minutes of the movie. That's only 30 minutes of an hour and a half, 3 hour or 3 hour movie. The right thing to do is first understand the whole movie. And then from that place of understanding, you've got greater context and clarity about the different passages. And so, I'll just say it's hard to come to conclusions when you're only familiar with pre-selected movie clips out of the movie. It's hard to come to conclusions when you're only familiar with pre-selected Bible verses when it comes to reading the whole book of the Bible. And so that's it for me. Happy practicing. Thank you all so much for listening and tuning in. I hope this equips you and helps you recognize that you are. I hope it equips you and helps you recognize Prose Discourse better, understand Prose Discourse better, know how it's shaping you, and know how to sift through what is being described so you can understand what's prescribed. And so enjoy the practice session next week, and remember that submitting to Jesus isn't just a one-time big decision, but a lifetime of